Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Now, I have for me it's exciting news, but I made a few slight additions and upgrades to my equipment. For example, I now have a nice handy little microphone here, so nothing else on in front of me on my laptop here, and also I added in a new ring light. Ba-da-ba-ba-da, ring light, ba-da-ba-ba-da, ring light, woo! Forgive me for that. But I'm excited. It's nice. It's kind of cool. And I'm excited to see how everything turns out at the end of this once I go through the whole process of editing and uploading this for your viewing pleasure. Now, I wanted to do a continuation, though, on last Sunday's episode, which was on politics in gaming. And I wanted to try to kind of narrow things down a little bit. But, for example, I wanted to run on with my example of Shadowrun. But that will require me getting into Shadowrun a bit more, and I'd rather give it a proper introduction, a what is Shadowrun episode. So we are going to look at how we as DMs can use politics in our games. I've kind of covered the subject a little bit before, actually, with my Running Cloak and Dagger campaign series, which, you'll see cards or little links popping up at the top of the video here throughout. But the thing with politics is, whatever setting you're running, whether it's a medieval style Western fantasy or Eastern style fantasy games, or if you're playing Shadowrun, Rollmaster, Cyberpunk, D20 Modern, Call of Cthulhu, any of these kinds of games, politics are going to appear in some form or another. As we covered in last episode for our Western and Eastern fantasy medieval sort of style games, those are going to take the forms of kings, tax collectors, things of a medieval kind of government. Those sorts of things are what's going to be most prominently appearing. You're not going to see a whole lot of, as one commenter, Gareth, hello Gareth, as he pointed out, you're not going to have a cleric of Bahamut asking you if you're pro or anti-gun or anything like that. They're going to be asking, are you up and willing to smite the heretical followers of Tiamat? Which, that's a fair and valid point, but there is a little bit of politics there as well, because Tiamat is a lawful evil deity, and as such, in certain areas, certain regions, especially if you're running some kind of a custom world, followers of Tiamat may be able to lawfully conduct their business openly within a particular city or a particular region due to their ties to local government. So that can introduce some interesting complications. And that already is an example of how you can use politics to help up the stakes in a setting without really increasing a lot of mathematical difficulty, adding in more opponents for combat encounters. You can add in social and societal pressures for the players to have to navigate and deal with. Because if the cult of Tiamat, if the Church of Tiamat is tied in good with whatever the regional government is, well, then the players have to tread carefully if they're in opposition to the worship of Tiamat. If they are tied in good with the local government and authorities, any actions taken against them are going to be opposed by town guard, any constables, the local lords. If the players are posing a serious problem, they'll start leveraging the military against them. And even if they're level 10 badasses, getting up even into level 14 or 15, at a certain point, the numerical disadvantage that you're at is just going to be that much of a problem. Sure, you're going to be facing a lot of rank-and-file conscripts, but you'll get to men-at-arms. You'll get to knights eventually. And a pack of knights, a cavalry charge, even 30, 40, 50 knights charging you down, even if they're level 4 to 7, that's still going to pose some kind of a threat to the players. Well, a wizard could probably deal with that pretty nicely, but eventually they're going to be harassed and hounded so badly that the wizards and the sorcerers, they're not going to have time to rest to memorize new spells. It's going to be a struggle to get that done. their characters are not going to have the time to rest and recover hit points, recover from exhaustion and fatigue. They're going to become wanted fugitives and being tracked down. And that, again, is another example of politics, dealing with the legal repercussions of their actions. That can easily ramp things up. This already sounds like a fantastic adventure to me, actually. I'd actually like to do something like this to my players at some point. But, yeah, that's how you can utilize political situations to really ramp things up. And as I covered in my Cloak and Dagger series, players are going to be dealing with, well, if it's Cloak and Dagger, they're trying to avoid legal repercussions in that kind of a setting as well. Whether it's assassinating a lord, a diplomat, the major domo for a king, or whether they're trying to blackmail one of the many advisors of courtiers for a particular kingdom or empire, that's going to involve stealth, subterfuge, lots of diplomacy, bluffing, all kinds of checks to make sure that they maneuver the pieces just right in order to get what they want, influence a particular outcome without being caught breaking laws. It's caught by the wider authorities, rather. There's all kinds of interesting things you can do if you're playing that kind of a setting. If the players are caught breaking into some courtier's house, their mansion, or if they have a room in the imperial palace, if they're caught breaking into there by the lord, they can't exactly just assassinate him. That's not what they're trying to do. And now they've been caught by a very powerful person, politically powerful and influential, who now has evidence on them. It's their word against the players, and now they can be leveraged into doing other things and undertaking actions for this particular noble. So it does present some very, very interesting situations using different aspects of politics and government in your games. Another thing that you can do, if that's not going to be your focus, if it's not so much if Cloak and Dagger is not what you're going for, politics are still going to be present, but they're going to be a looming background kind of a thing. Think the story from Avatar, The Last Airbender. The war with the Fire Nation, invading the Earth Kingdom, going to war with the Water Tribes, and having wiped out the Air Nomads. That's genocide right there. That's definitely massively political and has huge ramifications. But the war itself was both the focus and the background for the entire adventure, for the entire journey. Aang, Sokka, Katara, and Toph, they're all taking this journey, the Avatar's journey, finding different masters to teach Aang the different elemental bending styles so that he can come fully into his own and have mastery over all four elements and defeat the Fire Lord Ozai. It's the background for the setting. It's this constant looming thing. While the players go on all these different adventures that are at once divorced from, but still related to the overall goal, which is ending the war. And going to Kyoshi Island, that definitely didn't do a lot to further Aang in his power and abilities, but it was a nice little side adventure that they got to take, and you still got to see the ramifications, the threat and influence of the Fire Nation's war when the Fire Nation shows up and starts burning down the village on Kyoshi Island. You can do that for your own settings. Have whatever politics, whatever major players and power groups are present, kings, dukes, duchesses, empires, all of these things can just be the looming part of the background, part of the flavor for the setting. It's there. It's a threat of consequence, but it's also a promise of refuge, depending on where the players land on their allegiances towards these different factions and power players. So all of that can be present, and all of that can be leveraged for your games. And it just takes a little bit of thought and consideration on it. I believe that, if I recall correctly, the term is called Realpolitik. The idea is, realistic politics, realistic policies and a maximization of your cost and benefits. I forget the name of the Italian politician, but he wanted to create a unified Italian state, all of the peninsula. But he had to leverage and broker a deal with the French in order to guarantee that the state could be brought together and would not see interference from the French. And what it cost them was 3 towns on the northern part of the peninsula, down near the French-Italian border. And it cost them 3 towns. So they lost out on 3 towns, but they gained the rest. They were able to consolidate their hold on the rest of the Italian peninsula. And so it costs 3 towns, all the populace and resources that those towns came with. But the French did not interfere, and the French also recognized the formation of the Italian state. And with all of that, that cemented a lot of political hold and power and legitimacy for the newly formed Italy. Well, say newly formed, the reformed, however you want to look at it, it still gave them a political legitimacy. So if you're bringing politics in through that kind of a measure, if the goal is centered and focused in and around politics, then consider having the players look at it like a zero-sum game, which, we're playing games, so we may as well do that, where they are looking at their cost-benefit analysis and looking at how they can leverage their resources and their position with other powers in order to get those powers to recognize their own legitimacy, to give them legitimacy, in essence. There's a lot of different ways that you can play this, and it's really fascinating stuff to use and utilize and learn from. And in the interest in learning about politics for running your games better, I would say it's worthwhile to look at different interesting historical points. These different historical settings and time periods can give you a wealth of information. Whether or not you want to consider it politically, that's up to you. That's certainly the point of this video right now, but it's worthwhile to learn about these things. Like if you take the Sengoku Jidai period in Japan, where the Hosokawa and the Yamana clans wiped each other out and bled each other dry to the point that the rest of Japan ended up fracturing. What ended up changing all of that, for those of you who don't know the general history for this period in Japan, what ended up changing that was at one point the Oda clan went up against the Imagawa clan, and the Imagawa were one of the major powers in the eastern part of Japan. You had the Imagawa, the Takeda, Hojo, the Uesugi, and I want to say there's one more, but I'm spacing on that particular clan's name as well. And the Imagawa just ended up steamrolling the Oda clan. And they also had the fledgling clan that would become the Tokugawa clan at some point after Ieyasu ends up renaming his clan. They just start tearing through, and then Oda ends up delivering a devastating defeat to the Imagawa. The Lord Imagawa actually dies, and in that defeat, he gets some of the Imagawa lands, but he negotiates a deal with Ieyasu Tokugawa, and they end up splitting up what territory they can as the rest of the great clans start dropping down on what's left of the Imagawa and taking whatever pieces that they can out of that particular corpse. So, because they leveraged this deal and cemented an alliance with one another, an alliance where they actually genuinely trusted each other, the Oda clan was able to focus westwards towards Kyoto and started making gains that way, knowing that they had a reliable ally at their backs, an ally that could hold their own. And so they were able to help hold off the Takeda, prevent the Hojo from coming at them. Also, the reality of that political situation was because Oda and Tokugawa, or Nobunaga and Tokugawa, were able to rely on one another, the other great clans in that region could not and would not. So anytime any one of them started to move, like the Takeda did, when the Takeda started coming down at the Tokugawa, the Tokugawa clan held them off as best they could until Oda could show up to help them, and that prolonged the fighting. The prolonged fighting with so many troops away meant that eventually the Takeda clan had to retreat back to their territory to keep the Uesugi from taking their territory, to keep the Hojo from taking their territory. So that's another example of Realpolitik. By developing an alliance, a reliable alliance where they could count on one another, they were able to achieve more against greater, more powerful opponents. I mean, the patriarch of the Takeda clan, dude was a brilliant tactician. I mean, wonderful story, and his rivalry with the Uesugi was fantastic. The leader of the Uesugi clan. Gosh, I'm spacing on so many names tonight. So much for my Master of Lore title, but they had a rivalry going, and the guy was nicknamed the Bishamonten, the god of war. Well, he followed Bishamonten, the Japanese Buddhist war deity. I mean, he was considered his living avatar. That's how powerful a warrior and strategist he was, and he developed a rivalry with the Takeda clan. So it gives you an idea of the level of strategy and combat prowess that both of these clans had. But the alliance between the Oda clan and the Tokugawa allowed them to overcome and survive that. And eventually, it ended up bringing peace to Japan as Hideyoshi Hashiba ended up conquering and holding sway over most of the land. And then with his death, Japan kind of split in two, but Tokugawa ended up coming out on top and cemented control. And this is where I come to a point I had brought up last time. One of the great failings of political leaders is the failure to train up a successor. And this applies through so many settings. You take a look at the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. Brilliant man. Did not train up a successor. He couldn't envision a world without Bismarck. And then you also have various other leaders throughout history, throughout Western Europe particularly, where they just failed time and again to train up a competent and worthy successor. Tokugawa succeeded here. His son, his eldest son, was already a proven military commander, and so when Ieyasu ascended to the shogunate, he ruled for 2 years. By retiring early, he was still a power behind the throne as his son took the mantle. So by the time Ieyasu died, his son had already been ruling as shogun for years and was already a competent, proven military commander. So that cemented down that legacy and created like 200, 300 years of peace or so afterwards. So that's another example there. That's another thing that you can throw at your players. A weak leader can end up creating a situation where the realm divides as the different lords and nobles start to scramble for their own extra little scraps of power, gaining and building their own power bases over time, to the point that the king doesn't really matter. King's more of a puppet, a figurehead. Whoever controls the king still has legitimacy, helps maintain the legitimacy of the throne, but eventually everybody knows who the real power is. Or if a king or an emperor dies, but they have multiple sons, well, even if they have a named heir, if that heir is not competent or powerful enough to stave off their siblings, that can create another realm divide where the different nobles back their favorite candidate, whoever they think they're going to benefit most from more often than not. And that creates a situation with a massive civil war. Same thing happened in France at one point. The kingdom was divided in three. The three sons were supposed to each rule their own little section. Well, that wasn't good enough for them, so they all went to war with one another, trying to take whatever they could from their siblings. And very, very messy situation. But, like I said, this is an example of how politics and history, learning the history of these different situations, can create interesting stories for you to use. You can use that information to help build your own adventures and campaign settings. It's absolutely useful stuff and is something you should make use of. Don't flinch away from politics just because they can be, in real life, they can be frustrating and aggravating and induce all kinds of headaches that lead you to drink. But use them as the backdrop. Use them as the larger campaign narrative, the overall arc that the players go through. Use it for all of these different wonderful stories that you can create. But we're going to go ahead and call it there. If you enjoyed today's video, go on down there and let me know in the comments down below, and hit the like button as well. Or if you absolutely hated it, well, still let me know. Hit the dislike button and we'll engage in conversation. I'm more than happy to do so. But if you did enjoy today's video, well, I've got good news for you. There's 2 more popping up over here. One is something Google has decided that you will enjoy. The other is just another video I've happened to have done recently. Or, if this hasn't been your first stop here at the Gamers Den, then go on down there, hit the subscribe button, become a regular member, join the rest of the alumni here at the Gamers Den. Certainly, we'd all be happy to have you. But, with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you have yourselves a good night.